Horus Lupercal was one of the 21 Primarchs created by the Emperor in the earliest days of the Imperium, just after the end of the Age of Strife. Like the other Primarchs, Horus was scattered from Terra by the gods of chaos and was placed on a faraway world in an attempt to prevent the coming of the Age of the Imperium. Traditional accounts state that Horus was the first Primarch to be rediscovered, fighting alongside his father in the Great Crusade as Lord of the Lunar Wolves. Becoming the favored son of the Emperor and beloved by most of his brother Primarchs, Horus eventually rose to become Warmaster of the Great Crusade and was seen as second only to the Emperor himself in power and prestige. But in spite of all of this, he was eventually corrupted by the powers of chaos and initiated the Horus Heresy against the very Imperium he helped create. Early life. When Horus was scattered, his pod landed on the world of Thonia, a planet close to the Sol system. He was discovered by the Thonian gang overlord Khageddon and given the no-name of Nergui. Growing up for a time under Khageddon's gang, Nergui engaged in the perpetual gang warfare beneath Thonia's surface that dominated the world. However, his life changed dramatically when he came upon the pod he had arrived in Thonia on, now being excavated by the Mechanicum. Nergui engaged in battle with the Tech Priests, killing one and recovering its weapon before running back to Khageddon. Khageddon scolded Nergui for his recklessness, saying those he killed would chase them back to their tribal lair. Khageddon refused to give Nergui his kill name over the incident, much to the young ganger's anger. However, just as Khageddon predicted, Mechanicum adepts arrived at their tribal hold and began to dig through from the surface. With the chamber collapsing around them and most of the gang dying, Khageddon instructed Nergui to slay him to earn his kill name. After Nergui performed the act, he suddenly gained buried memories of the galaxy, technology, and himself. Even his body began to swell, seemingly awakened by a trigger. When the Tech Priests finally arrived at the chamber, a Primarch stood before him. Nergui proclaimed himself Horus. According to Horus himself, after his discovery, he was brought from Thonia to Terra alongside several of his elderly comrades from the gang world. He landed upon Terra to much fanfare, kneeling before the Emperor and taking an oath to serve him dutifully. This account, however, is sometimes disputed, with others claiming Horus returned to Terra itself. Because of this early discovery, Horus grew to be the most powerful among the Primarchs as he had grown up from a child to an adult at the side of the Emperor. For 30 years, he was the only Primarch to have been discovered. Friendship between the Emperor and Horus grew rapidly, and the Emperor eventually trusted him enough to give him command of the entire force of the Imperium. The Emperor had saved Horus's life at the Siege of Raylis as they fought back to back. At another battle, Horus repaid this debt when he hacked the arm off a frenzied orc as it tried to choke the life out of the Emperor on the planet of Goro. The first of his brother Primarchs, Horus was reunited with was Leman Russ, who he regarded as a savage and with a degree of hidden jealousy. Despite this, he fervently followed the Emperor's wish to have him get along with Russ and the other Primarchs that would soon be rediscovered. The Great Crusade. As the Emperor and the Great Crusade marched on, Horus proved himself to be a tactical genius. He knew precisely which force to send and where to send it, showing no mercy to those who opposed the Emperor but sparing the innocent from unnecessary bloodshed. As the Emperor departed to find and meet with rediscovered Primarchs, Horus was left in temporary command of the Legion's Astartes, and this helped prepare him for the role of Warmaster. After the Ullanor Crusade, in which an Orc empire was defeated, the Emperor, considering the crusade to be Horus' greatest victory yet, saw fit to partially transfer control of the Great Crusade to Horus, raising him to the rank of Warmaster, the highest official beneath the Emperor himself, and granting him command over any and all imperial forces, as well as other rights and honors. This strained Horus' relationship with several Primarchs, most notably Angron, Perturabo, and Conrad Kurz, who felt either they deserved the title or simply didn't want to take orders from their brother. Leman Russ and Lyon L. Johnson meanwhile openly accepted the decision but were clearly embittered by it. Rubert Guillemin, Jagatai Khan, and Ferrus Manus supported the decision simply because of duty. But Fulgrim, Mutarion, Sanguinius, Lorga, and Rogel Dorn all supported Horus' ascension to the point where they bowed their heads and meant it, and Horus grew closest to these brothers. In the last years of the Great Crusade, Horus would encourage the other Primarchs to compete against each other in order to discover the strongest and most able of his companions, and to improve their fighting abilities, as well as lead his own personal forces into several notable campaigns. It was after one of these campaigns, the first contact with the Interrex, that Horus chose to exercise his right, granted by the Emperor, to rename his personal legion. The Lunar Wolves were renamed the Sons of Horus. But despite these accomplishments, the formation of the Council of Terra and his father's return to Terra created a deeply buried resentment in Horus that, before the heresy, not even he truly seemed to realize existed. The betrayal. Unknown to Horus, his brother Lorga, along with his entire legion of word-bearers, had secretly fallen to chaos and conspired to make Horus the ruinous powers champion against the Emperor. For many years before acting openly, the word-bearers usurped loyalist hold on their legions by establishing warrior lodges. The full conspiracy finally manifested during a mission on the feral world Davin. Horus was wounded in battle by a blade of Nurgle wielded by the chaos-corrupted Eugen Temba. He fell unconscious, and under the advice of word-bearers first chaplain Erebus, the natives of the world helped to heal him. However, unknown to the desperate Mournival, the healers and Erebus himself had all long since become corrupted by chaos and were orchestrating the entire series of events. Having his dying body moved to the Serpent Lodge, Horus was soon subjected to an ancient chaos ritual by the Davin priests, while Erebus entered his mind disguised as the deceased Hasta Sejanus. This image of Sejanus showed Horus horrifying visions of the future, where the Emperor ruled as a god and had discarded the Primarchs once they had outlived their usefulness. Erebus also told Horus that the gods of chaos were peaceful beings with little interest in the Imperium, and it was the Emperor who was intent on destroying their realm on his quest for godhood. Most disturbing for Horus, he was told that the Emperor had used the powers of the warp to create the Primarchs. Horus was shown a vision of the past where all the Primarchs, himself included, were scattered across the galaxy into a warp vortex. The scattering of the Primarchs, despite being orchestrated by chaos instead of the Emperor, seemingly confirmed to Horus that the Emperor had used foul warp magics in his son's creations. Horus saw the Emperor, who had banned any research into the warp, as a hypocrite. Despite realizing early on that this Sejanus was but an impostor, Horus nonetheless accepted these revelations for unknown reasons, and his bitterness towards the Emperor, already growing from his father's isolation and secret project on Terra, as well as the formation of the Council of Terra, essentially subordinating the Primarchs to mortal humans, finally manifested in outright hostility. The only attempt to stop the conversion of Horus came from his brother Magnus the Red, who entered Horus's mind but was unable to interfere with the powerful rituals of the Davin cultists, or convince Horus to remain loyal to the Emperor. Horus dealt with Magnus afterward by manipulating Leman Russ into launching an all-out purge of Prospero. After his experience on Davin, Horus agreed to align with the powers of chaos in order to overthrow the Emperor, which he had become convinced was a corrupt dictator bent on achieving godhood and forsaking his sons in favor of mortal rulers. The Warmaster soon introduced the taint to the legions under his direct command, converting Angron of the World Eaters, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, and Motarion of the Death Guard to his cause. Eventually, Horus was also able to secretly recruit Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, Alfarius Omegon of the Alpha Legion, and Perturabo of the Iron Warriors. Horus also converted the Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus Kelbahal, founding the Dark Mechanicum, as well as many units of the Imperial Army. Heresy. Burning the galaxy. Horus moved, along with several other secretly traitor legions, to Istvan III, seemingly in order to suppress a rebellion and reinstate imperial control. Once he arrived, however, he sent down specially selected troops from all 4 of the legions with him, sending down all those he knew would never join him in open rebellion. Once they were on the planet, he proceeded to virus bomb the entire world and killed billions of inhabitants in seconds, along with hundreds of space marines, and a ground war eliminated the remainder. The psychic shock wave from this event was said to be louder than the Astronomicon. Horus then redeployed his forces to Istvan V, where he was met by 7 Space Marine legions sent to bring him to Terra to face an inquest into his actions on Istvan III. 4 of these 7 legions proceeded to rebel against the Emperor. It now became obvious that Horus had massive power as he hunted down the 3 legions that had stayed loyal. Only a few Space Marines managed to escape his forces and make it back to Terra, and among those killed was Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands. Eventually, Horus would mount the skull of Ferrus Manus in his throne room, where he began talking to it in private and lamenting that he must rely on psychotic generals and demons instead of true, effective strategists like Ferrus had been. As Horus' rebellion spread, he claimed a personal fiefdom in the Northern Imperium dubbed the Dark Empire. Ascension. Following a failed assassination attempt by Shadrach Medicine after the Battle of Dwell, Horus regained a lost memory that the Emperor had erased, that of the Emperor's unlocking of dark powers on Molech. Horus invaded the planet hoping to gain the same abilities as his father. Horus eventually managed to enter the gate, and after an unspecified but extremely long period of time exited the warp with his powers greatly increased. While time in the Imperium had only been mere moments, Horus had been within the warp for so long that he had visibly aged. Inside the warp for what seemed like an eternity, Horus had won 1,000 kingdoms, amassed billions of demonic followers, and defied gods. Eventually, Horus forcibly acquired the same power the Emperor had gotten, but with his own force of will and without deception like his father had. However, he had refused a place within the warp, choosing instead to re-enter the Imperium with his new power to make war on the Emperor. Aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Horus then survives an infiltration by the Knights Errant led by his former Mournival advisor Garviel Loken. The attempt failed and Horus killed Iacton Cruz before the Knights Errant escaped. Now with the powers of a god and maintaining his previously youthful appearance with his newfound abilities, Horus then set a course to fight his way through the Imperium in an attempt to reach Terra and, ultimately, to kill the Emperor and place himself on the throne. However, at the Trisolian, he was confronted by Leman Russ and his space wolves, who had tracked the Vengeful Spirit thanks to runes planted by the Knights Errant during the Battle of Molech. Russ and a large force of space wolves were able to board the Vengeful Spirit, and the 2 Primarchs came face to face. Russ was disgusted by what had become of his brother. Nonetheless, Horus pleaded with Russ to join him and help in his quest to overthrow the Emperor and expose his lies. Surprising none, Russ rejected Horus and the 2 engaged in a titanic battle. Despite Horus' sorceress powers, Russ was protected thanks to the spear of Russ he wielded. It thus came down to a battle of sheer power. One Horus was dominating despite Russ' speed. Horus caught Russ upon his talon, but Russ broke free of his armor and impaled Flesh to plunge the spear of Russ into the Warmaster's side. However, Russ hesitated at the final second to deliver the killing blow, and instead only partially pierced Horus' side. The wound was still devastating, and more importantly, the power of the spear cleansed Horus of the corruption that had befallen him since Molech. For the first time in the battle, Russ saw Horus Lupercal before him, not a creature of chaos. Despite the effects of the spear, Horus still remained committed to the Emperor's destruction and rejected Russ' offer to return to Terra and allow the Emperor to heal him. The 2 Primarchs again came to blows, and this time Russ was badly mauled by Horus' talon. As Horus stood over Rus and was about to deliver the final blow with Worldbreaker, a single space wolf rushed to his Primarch's aid and was swatted aside by Horus. Soon more came, and then hundreds, until Horus was swarmed by a desperate mob of space wolves piling upon him. The distraction gave Bjorn enough time to drag Rus back to his flagship Raffical and escape. After the battle, Horus ordered Abaddon to pursue the wolves to Yarant, but secretly expressed regrets that so much blood had been spilled in his war. The wound Rus gave Horus proved far more enduring than any could imagine. Constantly plagued by the Warmaster, at the Battle of Beetagarmon the wound reopened and Horus collapsed into a coma-like state. Before he passed out, Horus demanded that Malagast issue a general summons of all the traitor Primarchs to Alinor in preparation for moving on to Terra. Despite the best efforts of Malagast to hold the traitor war effort together, without Horus' power things began to fall apart. Fulgrim and Angron refused the summons entirely, while Muterion stated he would only take a summons from Horus himself. With Abaddon busy chasing the wolves in the Battle of Yarant, Horus Aximand and Falkus Kyber vied for leadership and undermined Malagast's authority. Malagast in desperation turned to Lorgar and Zardu Layak to revive the Warmaster. The word-bearers revealed that part of Horus' soul was still trapped within the Gate of Molech, and the Chaos Gods were tearing it apart in their squabbles over such a valuable prize. The majority of Horus' spirit refused to submit to the Dark Gods, and this combined with the doubt created by the power of the Spear of Rus had created his comatose state. With the sons of Horus facing destruction at Haitigladius under the leadership of Aximand, Malagast conducted a blood ritual with the bound demon Amarok to journey into the warp and attempt to recover the lost piece of Horus' soul. Inside he found Horus on an eternal battlefield, waging a never-ending struggle against enemies and creatures from across time and space. This Horus thought he was still on Molech and was unaware of what had transpired since. Malagast revealed the truth and bade Horus go with him. Horus refused to submit to the gods and free his soul from this realm, but Malagast attempted the ritual a second time. This time the two found themselves on Alinor on the eve of the triumph. Malagast begged Horus to submit to the gods, but the Warmaster refused to be a slave. Malagast noted that Horus had chosen this path and was no slave, and it was far too late to turn back now. The Warmaster must settle things with the Emperor and end the war. This time Malagast understood what must be done, and plunged a knife into Horus' wound. With Malagast giving his own life to awaken the Warmaster, Horus awoke and immediately took command of the Legion once more. With Horus renewed, he traveled to the surface of Alinor to meet with the traitor Primarchs who had already arrived. On the surface, he met Fulgrim and Lorgar. In truth, Lorgar had planned to usurp Horus as Warmaster, as he viewed him as weak and undeserving of the title. Before Lorgar's coup could be enacted, Horus revealed that he knew of his treachery thanks to the efforts of Actia. With the previously enslaved Fulgrim being freed by Zardu Layak, Lorgar's plan fell apart completely. Horus beat Lorgar viciously and exiled him, ordering that he never enter his sight again but retain command over the word-bearers of Zardu Layak. Before leaving, Lorgar revealed his sadness for Horus. He had become such a slave to chaos that even he pitied him. According to Layak, by this point, Horus' form was consistently shifting between various states. His pure lunar wolf form, that of the Warmaster, that of the empowered being on Molech, and finally his new form that was simply a dark maw of chaotic energy. Horus had finally thrown away the last of Lupercal. All that existed was a slave to darkness. Horus then met with the other Primarchs that arrived on Alinor: Proterabo, Angron, Alfarius, and Magnus. A second, darker triumph on Alinor was held as the traitors arrayed their forces. After sacrificing 1/10 of their slaves to the gods, Horus ordered all move on Terra at last. Terra. Horus' forces at last arrived in the Sol system in the Solar War. However, during the initial phases of the battle, Neither he nor the vengeful spirit appeared, and this led to much grim speculation by Rogel Dorn, Malcador, and others as to his true intent. Their suspicions were proven correct when a ritual conducted by Ahriman and the word-bearers aboard the comet created a massive warp rift directly over Luna, from which spilled tens of thousands of warships. At the head of the armada was the vengeful spirit, with Horus himself commanding from Lupercal's court. Beset on all sides, the defenses of the Sol system collapsed and Horus was able to strike directly towards Terra. But as Horus besieged the Sol system in the Materium, so did the ruinous powers assail the Imperium in the Immaterium. The Emperor alone held back the tides of the warp from the Sol system. As Horus finally arrived in the Sol system, he appeared to the Emperor as a feral wolf, goading the Emperor and declaring him a tyrant and liar. The Emperor refused to even respond to Horus in these exchanges, looking past him to instead announce his rejection of the ruinous powers and declaring their puppet as nothing. As the embers of his fire died, the shadows around him drew closer and closer. As Horus arrived directly over Terra, the fire finally died and Horus gloated that the only option left for his father was to run. Horus War came to its climax during the Siege of Terra. During the siege, he was increasingly absent from direct command, which frustrated First Captain Abaddon. Instead, Horus spent large amounts of time inside the pocket dimension that had become Lupercal's court, accompanied by Zardu-Layak and his word-bearers. Here he would fall into a comatose state, scanning the Empyrean for lore and weakening the Emperor upon their psychic battlefield within the warp. Horus swelled with the powers of the Chaos Gods and now commanded through fear rather than charisma. Abaddon began to become disgusted with what Horus had become, considering him now to be little more than a slave to the Chaos Gods. Zardu-Layak stated that while supremely powerful, the Chaos Gods would quickly burn out Horus with their power, and he had limited time left to live. Layak's prophecy rang true, as a few months into the siege Horus had begun to display signs of senility. He recalled past glories as if they were presently occurring, and called his current emissary Argonis by the name Malagast. Horus was kept recused from the traitor armies, and much of the day-to-day planning in the siege fell to Proterabo. After the setback at the Saturnine Wall, however, Horus became more directly active in the siege execution. Despite its formidable defenses, he ordered Proterabo to use the Legio Mortis to attack the Mercury Exultant kill zone. When Proterabo expressed doubt about the plan, Horus was adamant it would succeed because it willed it so. Later, Horus had Argonis inform Proterabo that the Iron Warriors were to be dispersed across the various war fronts and that the Lord of Iron's position would be taken by Muterion and the Death Guard. The act caused the already disillusioned Proterabo to quit the war effort. Horus remained isolated aboard the Vengeful Spirit until the final stages of the siege, where he began to prepare for his landing to kill the Emperor personally. Horus issued his first direct command not given through Argonis in weeks when he ordered traitor forces to capture the Eternity Gate. Horus then psychically ordered Angron to find and kill Sanguinius, and act more out of desperation than anything else. Death. Despite the Loyalists' success in holding the Eternity Gate, Horus' army was still on the brink of victory and soon captured the Bab Bastion, Rogel Dorn's command center. It was then that Horus, his mind in the warp, intercepted a message from Rubik Gilemin that he and his reinforcements were a mere 9 hours away from Terra. Horus finally rose from his throne and journeyed to the Bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. Journeying to the Bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, he addressed his equerry Kenner Argonis as Malagast saw long-dead Zardu-Layak at his side, and stated he would finally finish the war with a daring gambit. To the shock of all present, Horus stated that he had lowered the Vengeful Spirit's void shields, inviting the Emperor himself to teleport aboard his flagship. This would allow Horus to slay the Emperor before Guilliman's reinforcements arrive. With their Emperor dead, Guilliman's fleet would lose heart and scatter before the forces of the Warmaster. Soon enough, the Emperor took the bait, and he, alongside Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, Constantine Valdor, and their elite forces, all teleported to the vengeful spirit. It was then that Horus sprung his trap, using his sorceress connection to his flagship to scatter the loyalists throughout the vessel. He took control of many of the Emperor's own custodies, forcing them to attack their liege lord as the Emperor reluctantly struck them down. Rogel Dorn was trapped in an endless desert of madness for what seemed to him to be centuries. Horus revealed his true power and mental strength, which had been concealing to lure his father to him. According to Acti, Horus was preparing to be elevated to a fifth Chaos God, using humanity just as Slaanesh had used the Eldar. All across Terra, his followers chanted the name of the soon-ascendant Dark Kin, though this actually referred to the Emperor. Swelling with the powers of chaos, the fully awakened Horus drove the crew of the vengeful spirit mad with his mere presence, including hardened space marines, such as his equerry Kenner Argonis. He broke down the barriers of space and time between the surface of Terra and his flagship, causing the two locations to overlap with one another and for time itself to be paused at this single monumental moment, with even the inevitable city manifesting in his honor. Still preparing to face his father, Horus deliberately let Sanguinius reach him within the heavily mutated Lupercal's court. Planning to turn Sanguinius to chaos so that they may confront their father together, Horus was genuinely disappointed when his brother refused his offer to join him in the ascendancy. Instead, the already heavily injured Sanguinius attacked Horus with all his might, displaying ferocious combat ability. Horus still held back his true power, engaging in a purely martial battle with Sanguinius in hopes of breaking him down so he may accept the powers of the warp. However, Sanguinius fought so stubbornly and viciously that Horus grew frustrated and even took several wounds. In the end, Horus was forced to change his plans when he detected that the Emperor was coming towards his location. Horus finally decided to kill Sanguinius and unleashed his full power, reaching into the 8th dimension to grab Sanguinius and slam him to the ground mid-flight. Horus proceeded to batter his brother with Worldbreaker and impaled him several times with his talon before the skull of Ferrus Manus. Horus let out a disappointed sigh as his brother died and his body was strung up by demons. Shortly after killing Sanguinius, Horus was confronted by the Emperor. The Emperor and Horus fought with a power that would have eviscerated any mortal man dozens of times over with each blow. The Emperor held back for much of the battle, remembering Horus as his beloved son and not wishing to believe that he had turned so utterly to chaos. This allowed Horus to inflict crippling mortal wounds on the Emperor, since nothing short of the Emperor's full power would be sufficient to defeat him. At the critical point in the battle, a lone Adeptus Custodes guard entered the room, while others state the lone warrior to be Elanius Pius, an Imperial army soldier. Horus flayed him alive with but a look, and in that instant, the Emperor realized how far his favored son had fallen. The sacrifice of the custodian bought the Emperor time to deliver a finishing blow to Horus. With iron resolve, he gathered his full strength and delivered a massive psychic blow that killed Horus almost instantly and obliterated his very soul. In his final moments, the powers of chaos were driven from him, and the Emperor sensed his favored son's return to sanity for a fraction of a second before he finally died. Post-mortem. After the battle, the warship was won back by the forces of chaos led by Ezekiel Arbadon, captain of the First Company. Arbadon found Horus's body and ordered the retreat into the Eye of Terra. The body of Horus is said to have been put on display in a temple, the sons of Horus revering the Warmaster even in death. The Neverborn, on the other hand, remembered Horus not for his victories but his failures, referring to him as the sacrificed king. At the end of a series of inter-traitor wars, the fortress of the Suns on Malium was destroyed, and the body of Horus was stolen by the Emperor's children. To the disgust of the Suns, the body was used by Fabius Bile to create at least one clone of Horus. Ultimately, Arbadon returned to lead forces to destroy the Emperor Children's fortress and the clone of Horus with it. At the climax of the battle, Arbadon, wielding the Talon of Horus, confronted the clone of Horus who was armed with World Breaker. After killing scores of Arbadon's allies, the clone of Horus caught sight of the Talon of Horus being worn by another. Horus clone lashed out at Arbadon with World Breaker, but the first captain caught it with the Talon. World Breaker was crushed and Horus clone was impaled by Arbadon. In its dying moments, the clone of Horus remembered who Arbadon was and acknowledged him as his son. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.